as you can see, playing the song the two different ways is vastly, vastly different. And the reason is, when we're playing everything down here in these open chords, these cowboy chords, whatever you want to call them, everything you're playing is in the same tonal area. There's not a lot of variation. Now, granted, the chords do sound different simply because they all have different roots, thirds, and fifths. But tonally, they're all kind of in the same spot. And what do I mean by that? If we play the C, and then we play an A minor, they sound, well, really, 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 really similar. Granted, we're changing out a note, but still, they're in the same tonal area. And so therefore, it doesn't really work when you're playing something that requires a tremendous amount of movement, like the opening to Pink Floyd's Run. And what I'm talking about is when we play here, when we play this D, even though we're playing the same notes as this, tonally, it sounds completely different because we're playing so much higher on the fretboard or the register, if you're on a piano, whatever you want to call it. We're playing the same exact notes, but we're giving it a whole different sound by playing it up here as opposed to down here. And even though all these are the same, those are all Ds, but they sound different. And if you didn't know music and didn't know anything about theory, if I was playing you probably wouldn't know they were the same chord. And that's what I'm talking about, playing with variation. And the best way to play with variation is obviously it doesn't have to necessarily be triads. Everything doesn't have to be triads, because that's a big thing going on right now. It seems like every time I turn on YouTube, my channel just gets filled up with stuff on triads. And don't get me wrong, I have done my share of talking about triads because that's something everybody needs to learn. And granted, this is done in triads, but that is not the point of this video. Is we don't need another learn your triads, learn your triads, learn your triads. But it really does kind of help. But the point of it is, and we're not talking about triads, now we're talking about variations and inversions, because this is the one thing that a lot of people don't talk about. Everybody's triad this, triad that, learn your triads for different voicings. If you learn your triads, well, you do learn inversions, but nobody's saying learn your inversions and expand your chordal vocabulary just by moving the same chords around the neck. And it'll help you tremendously. It's kind of like if you're soloing in the minor pentatonic scale and you're just so used to playing this box one. And yes, there's a lot of delay on that channel. That is my Pink Floyd channel on my fractal. But it's kind of like playing and soloing there. You can play a solo there all you want. And there's a lot of great solos that are written in just one little box. But the problem with that is the variation becomes extremely limited because tonally, everything is in that same box. And I don't mean boxes in a pentatonic box, I mean in a tonal box. Everything kind of sounds the same. So if you're always soloing here, maybe you, I don't know, get a little spicy and change things up and maybe learn to play the A minor pentatonic here. Because now all of a sudden, even though it's all the same notes, now we've got a lot of variation going on. This, as opposed to this. All the notes are the same. But we're playing them up on the neck, up on the register, which tonally is giving us a whole new box to play around in. And let me change channels real quick. So if we're playing, you can hear right there that tonally it's all kind of the same. Everything's in the same little box. But if we jump out, same notes, but different box. Well, that's kind of the cool thing about learning your inversions and learning how to play chords in different places on the neck, the same chords, because everything is the same, but it gives us new boxes, new tonal boxes to play around in. And Pink Floyd's Run Like Hell is a prime example. I mean, how boring is it when it's played like this? Everything sounds kind of the same, as opposed to this. Because now we have a lot of movement, and we're not stuck in one little tonal box. There's a vast difference from this to this. And it's obvious which one sounds better. And it's also obvious which one's more interesting to the listener. If Pink Floyd had written Run Like Hell and played the intro, the song simply wouldn't be the iconic song that it is, because what's iconic about the song is the opening riff. And so on. But moving outside of one tonal box is going to increase your songwriting, your playing ability, your ideas, your soloing, your writing. It's going to increase everything enormously, because there's only so many songs you can write sitting right here before everything is going to get so boring sounding, and all your songs are going to start to sound the same after a while. So if you learn inversions and you learn how to play up and down the neck, or the register if you're on a piano, because all this applies to the same thing, of course. If you learn how to play the same chords in different positions, it's going to open up the possibilities. Simply because of different things you hear is what sparks ideas. It's what sparks innovation. If you're hearing the same thing all the time, well, then you're kind of hearing the same thing all the time. And it kind of goes back to that old saying, if all you have is a hammer, well, everything you see is nails. So if all you have is open chords, these cowboy chords, everything you hear sonically is going to be pretty much the same. So therefore, we have to step out of our box. Now, what we've done here, there's actually only 3 chords in the intro to Run Like Hell. And this isn't a lesson, but we're going to kind of break this down on how to find some of these chords in these inversions. It's not that complicated. If we're playing, let's say we're playing a D here, and we're only going to use the 3 notes, even though this is not a triad lesson. When I play inversions, I usually just use 3 notes because it's easier. So we have this D position, which we're also repeating here and here. So we know that chord and how to get there. So we have a D, and if we follow our major scale and we go up, that is an E. Now this is something that a lot of people should learn, because I can't tell you how many times people have been playing music here, then all of a sudden it calls for an E flat, and they don't know what to do, because all they've learned is this. Well, if we have a D here, we move it up a full step to an E, you go down a half step, and now you have your E flat. Keep that in mind. Get out of, the point is to get out of this box, these open chords. So we have the D, and that's pretty easy. That's not an inversion, that's just our standard D. That's our standard position of a D. Let me say it that way, actually. Because actually, if you want to think about it realistically, that is an inversion of a D. Because our F sharp, our third, is here. So it actually is an inversion playing a D that way, but that's the position we all know. So we're just going to call that a standard position. But when we go to this D here, well, how are we coming up with this? How do we know what this is? Well, it's not that hard. If you know, let's say for the sake of argument, the C, well, this is also a C. We can add this other root, and we can bar this off, and then we can add this high E string down here. Well, that is a C. Well, if we just eliminate these top two strings, that's a C. We have our D here. Well, this is a D. We can add this high E string. That's a D. Or we can just bar it off and add the fifth too. That is a D. So we just eliminate these top two strings, and that gives us our D and a whole different sounding, a whole different voicing. Same notes. Sonically, tonally, putting us in a different box. So that's how we find this version of the D, this inversion here. If you want to think about this in terms of inversions, roots, first and second, this would actually be the root position. So we have our D here. Here's our third. Then here's our A, which is our fifth. So we have our D, our third, which in this case is an F sharp, and our fifth. So actually that would be the root position, and this would be an inversion, realistically. But, so we know what this one is, and we know how to find it. We just play our regular chord, and we just get rid of this top string and play the bottom three. So now we have this D here. Well, how do we find this one? Well, you know how to play an F. Here's your bar chord. Take off this top string, and let's take off the fifth string too. And that's actually going to leave us with this. And everybody knows how to play an F like this, or a G, or an A. Well, all we got to do now is take off this fourth string, smooth that, and play these three. So this would be an F. And what we have here is right here we have our E. Well, that sounds good, doesn't it? We have a C. And then we have an F. And that gives us an F. And if we take this F, G, A, following the major scale, B, C, D, 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 D. And that is going to just give us so many more boxes to play around in, because everything's not sounding the same all of a sudden. Everything isn't this. And like I said, there's nothing wrong with that, but you can't do that forever. And I wrote a song, a quick little side note about how this works. I wrote a song and I just could not get it to work in my head. And I was actually playing it here. I was playing it here and I just could not make it work to save my life. So I took it over to the piano, because for some odd reason, as soon as I get on the piano, I instantly go into arpeggio mode. Instantly. That's just kind of how, to me, a piano works. I instantly go into arpeggio mode. So after sitting around on the piano, because I really liked what it sounded like, but it wasn't sounding how I needed it to sound, I started messing around with it on the piano. And I started kind of conforming it down, these little inversions. And it ended up being this. Now granted, for that part, we are playing in our little tonal box, and it works great for this particular song because of how the melody line lays over the top of it. But when we get into the pre-chorus and the chorus, of course, everything moves and we're no longer in this little tonal box right here. But if it wasn't for the fact that I understand the inversions, and playing it down here just did not sound right. It just, the pitches weren't right. It sounded too low. But since I understood the inversions and how it all works, and once I sat at the piano and kind of started thinking about it in that form, in more of an arpeggiated form, then it kind of started to come together and it came out with the sound that I wanted, which happened to be that sound. But the point I'm making is it's very critical to learn your inversions. You can't sit here and spend your whole life right here. There's nothing wrong with playing pentatonics. Look at Zakk Wylde. He's an absolute monster, and he pretty much plays almost everything in pentatonic scale form. Randy Rhoads killed pentatonics and wore them out. Eddie Van Halen wears them out. But if you notice, they move between the pentatonic shapes. They don't stay in the same box. So instead of playing here all the time, jump up to here and give yourself a little variation, a little tonal variation. Because without tonal variation, well, your music gets very boring very fast. And I know everybody's heard it, and then we'll wrap this up. But you notice how some bands, they make an album and it's just huge. It just sounds fantastic. Then they make a second album and it sounds exactly the same. That's a lot of the reason why. They're not exploring the sonic abilities of playing things in different places on the instrument. They kind of fall back into their safe space, into their box, and that's where they continue to work from. So instead of playing this song, there, maybe you try to play it here. Same thing, sounds completely different, and it adds a whole new vibe to the song. So I'm going to wrap it up right there. Please subscribe to the channel. If you get anything out of this video whatsoever, please give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe. And if you don't like the video, give it a thumbs down, because after all, it is still traffic to the video. And ultimately, that is what matters, is traffic to the video. Learn your inversions, and I promise you, it's going to make you a better guitar player. Get out of that same little sonic hole, that little black hole you've been playing in your entire life. Jump out, learn the inversions, and start playing the chords up and down the neck. And you will have ideas. Ideas will start popping. They will start flowing out of your musically dead brain, where you've just been slamming into that wall for the last 5 years, and you can't think of anything else in this world to play. Change gears and play something else. Like the great Sammy Hagar says, if you miss the beat, you lose the rhythm, and nothing falls into place. And for the love of God, whatever you do, rock on.